In today's video, we're checking out the most impressive lens I've tested from the folks at Viltrox. This is their 50mm F1.4 Pro for the Sony E-mount. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. I'm going to give you a rundown of the new Viltrox 50mm F1.4 Pro lens. This has been an absolute pleasure to use, and I would put this in the best of 2025 when it comes to lenses and camera equipment for a few different reasons, which I'll talk about in this video. This is a premium lens at an affordable price. It gives you all the bells and whistles you'll find on a Sony G Master lens, but at a fraction of the price. This is about $1,000 cheaper than the Sony G Master lens equivalent, coming in at only $549 US. This review will cover both videography and photography, so stick around. I'll timestamp everything down below. If you want to take a look at this, I'll link it down in the description box or in the pinned comment. Before we get into it, a massive thanks to the folks from Viltrox for sending this in for review. I really appreciate it. This is what kind of makes the E-mount special. There's so many great options when it comes to really premium lenses at a much less expensive price. So yeah, this is an absolute beast. If you're looking for the G Master experience and you don't want to spend the big bucks, this is a really awesome choice. Let's kick things off by talking about who this 50mm f1.4 lens is for. Now at f1.4, it's nice and bright, letting in a lot of light, so you can really get a lot of background blur, subject separation. It's great in a low lit situation also, which is great whether you're shooting videos or photos. You can have this dialed in at f1.4. It's going to give you a really premium look. Lots of background blur and bokeh, which is really cool. Now at 50mm, you're also getting the most versatile focal range arguably out there. It's known as the nifty 50 if you're unfamiliar with that. So it works great for just general purpose photography, street photography, portraits, general video work, seated interviews, tight shots on products, and just about everything else. So yeah, 50mm is one of my most used focal lengths because of its versatility. The build quality on this lens is exceptional, and it gives you all the premium upgrades you would expect on a pro lens, which is phenomenal. So we get an aperture ring, which can either be set to clicked or unclicked, thanks to the on-off switch over on this side. So if you want to say ramp the aperture from f1.4 all the way down to the minimum at f16, you can do so, which is awesome. And I'll show you an example of how smooth it is on screen using it in the unclicked mode. Now, if you prefer to leave it clicked, like I do, especially when taking photos, you can set it to on, and it's got a really tactile feel. You're not accidentally going to knock it out of place or anything like that. There's also an automatic option on the far side over here, which allows you to control the aperture via your camera. We get an autofocus manual focus switch on the side, which again doesn't feel like it's ever going to be clicked accidentally, which is great. And there's a custom function button on the side. Now, by default on my camera, it's a focus hold button. So if you're shooting autofocus and you hold this button down, what it's going to do is maintain focus, and then when you release it, it will then pull focus. It's a really handy thing. You can customize this within the camera system, but by default, it's already usable straight out of the box. The focus ring on this lens feels amazing under the fingers. Now I'm shooting this talking headshot with the Viltrox 18mm f1.8 lens, which is a great lens, similar build quality to this, but this one just feels a little bit smoother, and it feels even better to use than my Sony G Master 24mm f1.4. So again, it's a really premium build quality. We get magnesium alloy construction here. There's weather sealing and a gasket on the back of the lens here, so it is weather sealed to some extent, and yeah, it's built beautifully. There's a 77mm front filter thread on here, so if you plan on using NDs or polarizers, you can absolutely screw them into this, and I would highly recommend using this, especially outside shooting with ND filters if you want to shoot at f1.4 in particular, because the Sony shutter speed will max out at a pretty low level compared to other camera systems. So all of the sample footage you're seeing throughout this video was shot with some NDs. This lens gives us 15 elements in 8 groups, and if you're wondering about the size and weight, yes, it is quite big. As you can see, it's quite a lot larger than the 24mm f1.4 G Master lens that I've got. Now, while some of this is definitely in the lens hood, physically it is quite a lot bigger, coming in at 800 grams. So you've just got to make that consideration if you're thinking about getting this lens. It is quite a lot heavier than some of the other options out there. While this lens is large and it did feel a little bit front heavy on my Sony ZV-E1 over here, the great news with it is that it's a pleasure to use, and the optical results kind of speak for themselves. So you can work out whether or not you can justify the size, weight versus the end result. And I think for most people looking for a pro lens, this will still make a lot of sense. Now, the only small consideration here when it comes to how it sets up on some tripods is that if you've got a small camera body like this, like the ZV-E1, for example, you may have to just shuffle the lens forward a hair on some tripods. Not all, but on some, you might find that the lens is actually hitting the base of the tripod and not the camera body. So yeah, just shuffle things around, you should be fine. Continuous autofocus for video on this is solid. It did start out a little bit sluggish, but I just ramped up the speed and sensitivity in the camera, and it had no problems tracking Rhiannon or anytime I was tracking an animal. It locked onto the eye, and Rhiannon was able to move in and out of frame, up and down, and all that kind of stuff. All the same sort of tests we're used to seeing. It had no problems tracking the subject. It is a little bit sluggish if you have the speed and sensitivity on the camera set too low. So just increase it to about 6 and 4, and you'll get really responsive autofocus tracking. It was just a hair too slow with the settings all in the center. So just speed it up a little bit and you'll get some really solid results. It doesn't hunt or do anything funny, even with faster sensitivity and speed, which is great. I also got to test this out down at Caldermead Farm, which is one of my favorite places to shoot photos and video. Such a fun place, lots of cool animals and all that kind of stuff. So I got to test it on birds, goats, ducks, sheep, and a whole bunch of other animals, and it had no problems either detecting the eye, or if they were turned around in the frame and their back was in the shot, then it had no problems focusing on that either. I saw the box come up and everything worked as expected. I think the takeaway here is with continuous autofocus for video, for moving subjects, just increase the speed and sensitivity and you'll be good to go. We also tested product showcase mode, which is a dedicated mode on the Sony ZV-E1, which is where you can hold something up like this and it will move to the subject. Now, this lens also did a great job. Let's take a look. As you can see from these test examples, it had no problems pulling focus to the foreground, back to Rhiannon, and back to the object in frame. Now, if you don't have the dedicated product showcase mode, it's still going to work fine. You'll just have to cover up your face in this kind of fashion to get the same sort of results. So yeah, it works no problems. The first thing you should do with this lens as soon as you get it, if you buy it, is to update the firmware, and to do so, just remove the rear cap, connect the USB-C port on the back here to the computer, download the Viltrox app, whether you've got PC or Mac, there's an app available, and it will automatically detect the lens, and then you can update the firmware nice and fast. It only takes a few minutes and the whole process is pretty painless. Focus breathing is also really well controlled, and this is where the edge of frame will appear to zoom in and out as the lens pulls focus from minimum to infinity focus and back. And on this lens, there's not a whole lot of distracting focus breathing, which is again why this makes for a really great lens. If you're someone who likes to tap to focus, this will also do a really great job. I had no problems pulling focus from one spot to the other, whether I was in the studio or out in the field, just by using the LCD screen. At the start of the video with that roller skating example with Rhiannon, I shot most of that footage at f1.4 using ND filters. And guess what? There was very low chromatic aberration, which is the green and purple fringing you might see in the out of focus areas behind you. The cool thing with this lens is there's very little, to the point where I was expecting to see some on that white sign that was behind her in some of the shots, or on a roller skates, or just something. And I didn't see anything that was too distracting to my eye. Now, I don't pixel peep, so if you want to pixel peep, you can be the judge for yourself, but I'm a big fan of how this renders an image, and it doesn't seem to have too many distracting artifacts, including chroma. All right, let's talk about the photography shooting experience and the end result here. So again, I love the fact that we can turn the aperture ring to clicked when we're shooting photos, and even shooting wide open at f1.4, you're getting a really premium image that's nice and sharp in the center. If we zoom in on a few of these photos here, you can see just how much skin texture we can see. And this was all shot with the Sony ZV-E1. So if you've got an actual photography camera that gives you a higher resolution, you'll be able to get more detail out of your photos than what I'm showcasing on screen. Now at f1.4, you're letting in lots of light. It would be great for low light photography, but if you just like to isolate your subject, like you can see in these photos, it does a really great job. And just know you don't have to shoot wide open all the time, even though most people do. You can stop it down. f2.8 is fine, f5.6 is fine. So just experiment around and use the best aperture for the job and shooting scenario. If you're shooting a landscape, you won't need it wide open at f1.4, so stop it down to f8 and see what kind of results you can get. As you can see on screen, I think this lens does a really great job in a lot of different situations, which is why a 50mm lens is an excellent option. The minimum focusing distance on this lens is pretty average, coming in at 45 centimeters. So unless you really need to do macro work, you might want to look at something else, but it does a pretty solid job, and here's a few examples of how it looks on screen. Now, if you're into shooting Sunstars and all that kind of stuff, this is at f16, and as you can see, the Sunstars actually look pretty great. This is without any ND filter or anything on the front of the lens, so you can check out the flaring. It actually looks pretty well controlled overall here. If I open it up to f11, the Sunstar effect looks like this. This is f8. Still looks really nice. f5.6, starting to disappear a little bit more here. But f11 seems to be about the sweet spot, maybe f16 as well. Back to f16 now, and boom, beautiful. All right, let's wrap this up. I'm gonna give you my final thoughts here and first impressions of this beautiful Viltrox 50mm f1.4 Pro lens. So if it wasn't blatantly obvious, I really like this lens. This is the best Viltrox lens I've tested so far, and I've tested plenty that I've liked, but just in terms of overall image quality, build quality, and for the kind of stuff I love when I shoot video, this thing has been an absolute pleasure to use. So if you're a video shooter first and foremost, the performance out of this is excellent. As I mentioned already, some of the considerations with this lens would be its size and weight. It's 800 grams, and that might not be for everybody in every shooting situation. But if you're someone who's looking for professional results and you can live with a lens that weighs 800 grams, I think this is one of the best lenses I've tested to date. And in terms of build quality, again, it's right up there with the likes of my G Master. The last thing I want to mention with this lens that's definitely something worth mentioning in this video, because I'm not sure if anyone else has mentioned this, if the lens isn't attached to the camera body and you're just moving it around, you can hear the autofocus motors sort of sliding around in there, and clunking around a little bit is probably a better term. So yeah, just get prepared for that. It was something that I wasn't anticipating. I've got other lenses that do this, so it is quite normal, but it's way more audible than I'm used to on this particular lens right here. At the end of the day, this is an excellent lens in terms of build quality and optical performance, and if you're happy to live with the size of this lens, I think it's an absolute no-brainer. Again, it's been a pleasure to use, and it's something I'm going to be holding on to for a very long time. Thanks again to Viltrox for sending this out. If you want to take a look at it, I'll link it down in the description box below. Catch you soon.